Hi, folks. Welcome to today's live webinar on understanding attack surface management with Chris Ray from GigaOm. My name is Ansh. I run product here at Cycognito. I'm really excited to sort of delve into the trends that are shaping the market in attack surface management. Some of the key capabilities that are needed to address the problem. And we'll get started in a minute. I just want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items as we get started, and we'll start in about a couple of minutes. First of all, you could use the Q&A button to submit questions. We'll spend about 35 minutes on discussing the attack surface management space and the trends that shape it and so on. And then we'll leave some time at the end to address some of the open questions, or if it makes sense, I'll try to weave in some of the questions along the way as well. With that, let me get started. And first of all, thank Chris Ray, analyst from GigaOm and the primary author of the GigaOm Radar report, which we'll be talking about today. So here are some of the key areas of focus. Well, Chris, I was hoping to sort of break down the report structurally and get into some of the insights, the key insights about the evolution of the market, what some of the adoption drivers are, key capabilities, selection criteria, what are people seeing, what are the benefits organizations are realizing out of this, and any other perspective, of course, that you can add to it. So this will be the general narrative. This is the second report, right, Chris? And I wanted to start by maybe letting you talk a little bit about just sort of your background, as in what are some of your areas of research focus, and how long have you been focused on external attack surface management?
Yeah, so thanks, Ansh, for having me, by the way. I think it's really important to understand that when you and I are talking and others are listening, my background is that of an engineer, as an architect, very hands-on, very practical, very pragmatic. I don't come to GigaOm as a analyst by trade. I didn't come from a Gartner or a Forrester or the others. And that's really important to understand, because the research and analysis, and then ultimately the radar report, which we're talking about here, they're the results of my analytical engineering mind, looking at the key features and the different ways to evaluate attack surface management solutions, and then scoring and placing them on a radar graphic, which you see there on the slide, 360 degrees, comparatively or respectively, among their peers in this space. So keeping that in mind, when we're talking about attack surface management, there's really only a handful of key features, the key capabilities, the things that they must do to be an attack surface management solution. They must do them really, really well. But unlike some of the other topics that I cover, such as vulnerability management or extended detection and response, which have 7, 8, 9 key features, attack surface management in this report really has 5 key features. We start talking about those later in the report, but I think that's really important to understand that there's a lot of value to be gained here, but at the same time, you don't have to learn a lot of new things to understand it and select a good solution for your organization.
Yeah, makes sense. So that's a great introduction to how you got to the report. Maybe we could start by sort of at the highest level on what's really driving this market. Like, I mean, what is the external, from your perspective, and the research that went into this? I know you talk about a lot of areas in the report, from discovery to active assessment to risk scoring, asset categorization, threat intel. There's a lot of different areas that are covered, in addition to other business criteria like flexibility, discovery frequency, scale, costs, all of that. But as far as like sort of the root problems that external attack surface management looks to solve, what are they from what your research shows?
It's probably because I've experienced this myself, coming from engineering architecture background. It's a lack of confidence in your existing solutions. You can't confidently state to your leadership, to the board, to whoever it is, that yes, I know all of the known unknowns now. We are comprehensively covering all of the areas that an attacker could find us on. Your legacy vulnerability management approaches, they don't enable that confident answer to the questions that come to you by leadership. So 3, maybe 4 years ago now, as I dove deeper into the attack surface management space, I realized this is a space that is solving that problem. It gives the clients, the people who use these solutions, the confidence to stand up and say, yes, we have explored our entire attack surface and we know what's out there. We have quantified the risks. We have made prioritized efforts to remediate and fix the things that are really bad. That's probably the best understanding of attack surface management 4 years ago as it is still today. That's a key driver in this space.
Yeah. I've been at Cyclopedro for a little over 3 years. When I started, I remember a lot of the interest was mostly around visibility, as in like it hadn't become a bona fide practice within SecOps. Today it is. But at the time, organizations primarily were looking to say, okay, I recognize that there's a visibility gap here, that it may be significant, and they wanted to understand what those assets were that were exposed, but they weren't necessarily fully ready to operationalize the findings or to start assessing those assets for risk. That a lot of that has changed over the last 3 years. So, we generally see this sort of evolution from visibility being the first challenge that organizations tend to try to address. They want that base visibility into the unknown unknowns. Then they want to quantify the risk, and then it comes down to a lot of the operational side of it, which is, how do I prioritize the ones that really matter and act on it and engage with the IT teams to fix these issues. Is that generally how you see it as well? Is that sort of the trend? And are you seeing any other sort of shifts in the space?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. 4 years ago, adoption of an attack surface management solution meant you are now going to see everything, good and bad. And that is very overwhelming for, I'd say, most organizations, maybe everybody. The first time you see the full scope of your attack surface, you can say, wait a second, I didn't even know half of this stuff was out there. This is bad. It can take weeks, more like months, to really wrangle that.
That's right.
And once you get it wrangled, once you've performed a comprehensive discovery, which is what attack surface management helps do, then, like you said, there is that maturation in the process. You're like, okay, now we've seen everything that's out there. I need to find a way to prioritize this. What's the risky assets here? What are the riskiest findings here? And that's sort of, there's a few things driving the evolution of the ASM market. One of them is active assessment of vulnerabilities. That's a key feature. And what does an active assessment feature get you? It gets you again, getting back to the confidence issue we were talking about. Actively assessing the vulnerabilities that are discovered in your attack surface management solution give you the confidence to say, yes, I know exactly what kind of service that is. Yes, I also know it is not vulnerable to what we initially identified because we tested it and the tests were negative. But if that were to ever change in the future because mitigation A or mitigation B could change, well, that's going to be bad. So that's one part of this, the active assessment in the space. The other part that I'm seeing a lot of changes, people are really happy with what they get out of ASM. They're like, wow, this is a huge upgrade from our legacy vulnerability management approach. They start looking around within their organization and saying, where else can we apply this approach? And the first thing that a lot of people think of is internally. Can we take this comprehensive discovery, this active assessment of vulnerabilities, and can we turn it inward and find all the vulnerabilities inside of our perimeter? And that's really been the genesis for internal attack surface management, which is, I don't think it's going to be a standalone. I think it's a a module or a component or a feature of a bigger ASM solution, you know, as we've talked about before.
Yeah, I completely agree. We were definitely seeing a lot more confluence of the external and internal angles in exposure management. There are some other areas that also have sort of we're seeing more of now. For example, the relevance of external exposure management or attack surface management, if you will, to areas like pen testing. Do you see any of that? You know, like historically, pen testing has been an underserved area. I would argue, you know, you're doing it once a year. You go after a targeted web app maybe, and hive it off for the exercise. Really, this should be informed by what's the attacker likely to go after. Let me make sure those targets are secure. Let me be testing those things continuously. Have you seen any of that sort of emergence of this expansion of ASM into areas like red teaming, pen testing, in your research?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, you know, any organization that goes through whether it's compelled to perform an annual penetration test for regulation or for compliance purposes, or they have one once a month, or they have an internal team that performs penetration-like testing continuously around the clock. Wherever that organization or those organizations are, they recognize the unique value that a penetration test provides to their tech stack. It finds things that they didn't know. To your point, you know, attack surface management has a few adjacent spaces. I don't want to say vulnerability management is one. I think this is sort of the evolution of away from vulnerability management. But a common adjacent space is the penetration testing space. Or some people, you know, they might postulate that continuous automated red teaming is going to become a feature of attack surface management. And really, what we're looking at here is, remember I talked about the active assessment of vulnerabilities as a key feature. The penetration testing is taking it to the next level. It's saying, okay, we've identified a real vulnerability on this asset in the attack surface, but what can be done? That question is answered with the penetration testing. What is the real impact here? What's the real risk? How likely is it to be performed? You know, if you have an expert in penetration testing that they do this 365 days a year, 7 days a week, and they can't manipulate or use the vulnerability that's been actively identified, well, you know, what is the real risk there? However, if it takes them 5 minutes and they use some easily identified tool or script from the internet, well, that's a good indicator of what the real risk is, right? So that's absolutely, I see I don't want to call it a maturation, but one of those adjacent fields like we talked about, continuous automated red teaming or penetration testing or any of those red team-esque features, absolutely blending into attack surface management. Because again, comprehensive discovery of attack surface, you find the things with the risks. Well, the very next thing you want to do is poke and prod at them to see what the risks are.
Yeah, I completely agree. As we move from sort of the core challenges that define the space into where a lot of companies are today, which is operationalizing these findings. One of the big challenges in the space has always been, you know, noise, false positives, false negatives. Anytime you deal with unknown unknowns, you're going to have some percentage of that problem. As part of your sort of research and conversations with organizations, how much did that come up?
Oh yeah, it's crucial. It's so crucial, in fact, that are you familiar with the term table stakes?
Yep.
So table stake, for those who aren't familiar, that is a feature of a solution that must be available in the solution in order for it to even be considered that kind of solution. So a table stake, for instance, for attack surface management is continuous discovery of attack surface. It must do that. If it doesn't do that, it's not an attack surface management solution. One of the other table stakes is management of false positives. If your ASM isn't actively managing and finding ways to manage the false positive results that are returned as it's a natural side effect of comprehensive discovery, then it's not an attack surface management solution. That's how critical it is. It's absolutely a table stake. And the reason I made that a table stake, because there could be an argument that you could say, well, no, that sounds like a key feature. That sounds like something that not all ASMs do, but some do. That's sort of how you define a key feature. The problem with that is there's over 150 ASM vendors or people who claim to do ASM, but only about 30 of them have active false positive management features in them. And that's really important to have. So using that as a table stake, we're able to hone in from the 150, narrow that scope down to the 30 that are really doing ASM well.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the big challenges with having noise in ASM is operationalizing it becomes very difficult, because, you know, you have a SecOps team that is now, let's say, has visibility into assets that are exposed to the outside and into issues. And the findings have to be triaged by some IT part of their organization, not by the SecOps team, by IT ops somewhere in. And for many of our larger customers, that's often a subsidiary in a different country, even. And so, you know, when you reach out to these organizations and tell them, you know, hey, I'm opening this ticket, here's an asset you own. And if that asset doesn't actually belong to them, then over time, you know, they start rejecting what you're sending them. So it creates it adds to this distrust between SecOps and IT ops. So that's why I think the fidelity of discovery followed by the fidelity of testing is really key. What we focused on right now was a little bit on the discovery side. When it comes to testing, sort of a broad question here, there are multiple ways you can uncover risk. You know, I would contend that there are a lot of tools in the space, Chris, that take a low-cost approach to testing. They do things passively, as in they're doing CP to CV conversion. So they're saying, you know, if you have the vulnerable software, then you're vulnerable, versus actually sending a payload and corroborating it with a much higher fidelity that vulnerability exists. And that again is a second element that leads to operational challenges and scaling out attack surface management. Have you seen this division of passive versus active testing? You know, we see a lot of it, and we see that customers are starting to recognize more and more that you know, they can't process tools that are focused primarily on sort of this passive testing approach of just saying, you know, hey, if the vulnerable software exists, then, you know, the vulnerability exists. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's worked in a frontline role in the security engineering space, security analyst space, you've had fill in the blank legacy vulnerability management tool tell you this is a critical CVSS 10.0, network accessible, blah, 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 blah. And mistakenly, you take that, make a ticket, you run to whoever the responsible team is, and you say, please fix this. Dear Lord, please fix this. This is really bad. But then you are shown the error of your ways and the error of the legacy vulnerability management approach that has no idea the context of what that vulnerability is. It just says, with high confidence, you have vulnerable software in your environment, but it doesn't have any idea about the myriad of other mitigations that are there, knocking it down from a 10.0 to really like a 1.4, 1.5, whatever you want to say. So, you know, the way I see that being solved in ASM, and yes, to the point I think you're making is management of false positives, that's a table stake. Actively assessing what it finds, what the ASM solution finds, that's a key feature, because not all ASM solutions are actively assessing the results that are returned. So in a way, those that are relying solely on passive assessment and no other context, yes, they are not as accurate in their assessment of the risks or the vulnerabilities that are identified in the attack surface. That's just the nature of the game. It's not to say that they aren't somehow in other ways better or good or worse. It's just to say it's a different approach that ends at a different path.
Yeah, and you see sort of the evolution of the radar is sort of encapsulating more of that evolution of requirements that are not just on the discovery front, but also on the deep testing and prioritization. Because what an effective ASM solution is going to find a lot of net new things, a lot of assets that were unknown, a lot of issues on those assets that organizations didn't know about. So, and then now that usually is well above and beyond an organization's SecOps bandwidth. Certainly what we see is like we find 30, 50, 70% more assets than organizations even knew were exposed. And then on that, you're finding thousands of high-end critical issues. So a key sort of capability here to sort of get ASM adopted has to be to prioritize what really matters. And the whole perspective there is around, the attacker's perspective. How attractive is something to the attacker? How discoverable is it to the attacker? How actively exploitable is the issue today? Is it being used in any adversarial campaigns? And using those things to take down the volume of what might be thousands of findings down to, let's say 50 or less, which is typically the capacity of even larger SecOps teams that we speak on a monthly basis. So that sort of deep prioritization, you see that emerging as a sort of a tighter core capability requirement in the space?
Yeah, and really, everything that you see, yourself included, Psycognito, any vendor in tech, they are delivering solutions to problems that customers have brought them, right? So what is the problem that this is solving? The problem that this is solving is customers have been very excited about ASM, and maybe they're not the final decision maker. They need to get the buy-in from somebody else in order to spend the money. They bring them this magical solution that comprehensively discovers their attack surface and delivers, accurate, true results to them. And they think, maybe we're only missing about 10% of the attack surface right now. We're doing pretty good. I bet you we're only missing about this much, so it's only going to make this much more work. However, their leadership may come to them and say, well, what if we're missing this much of the attack surface and we have this much more work, but you've still only got 2 people? Is this money wasted? Is basically what they're going to say. Great, we know about these risks, but that's not going to do us any good. We don't have the bandwidth to fix them all. So the solution to that problem is, well, what if you discover this much more attack surface, but you only give this much more work because you've de-risked or you've deprioritized the things that don't matter, and you've filtered out a lot of the noise through a variety of means to deliver just the 6 things you need to fix out of the 10,000 new things you didn't know about. That's really what the solution is. You'll find that solution in a few ASM platforms, various names, whatever you want to call it. But as a buyer of ASM, if you take that problem and you shop it to the various ASM vendors in the space, you'll find of the 150 and then narrow down to 30 or so that are in the radar report, there's a smaller subset that are actually doing that well.
Yeah, I completely agree. A lot of tools that in the space started by focusing primarily on sort of IP-centric discovery and detection, but that's not where the biggest risk actually resides. A lot of real risk is in applications or web apps that are exposed to the outside. And so it's really important to have an awareness of the construct of the notion of a web app, to understand that a web app is it protected by a WAF or not? Does it capture PII? Does it represent an e-commerce page? And all those risk factors are something that historically has been underserved by the ASM market. Do you see any sort of evolution in terms of requirements but also in terms of the way you think the radar will evolve towards acknowledging sort of the importance of web apps, which, by the way, if you look at the DAST space, there's an economic issue there. Like we see most organizations testing maybe 2, 3, 4% of their web apps with DAST capabilities. And you've got so much risk resident there. You really need to be testing it continuously and be testing the vast majority of it versus this 1, 2% level risk. Was that something that you sort of you've encountered, or that you see as becoming like sort of the forefront of the way that ASM evolves?
Yeah, that's sort of the evolution of a table stake, that comprehensive discovery component. Comprehensive is it's a vague notion. You define comprehensive, then I'll define it, and then we could have 10 more people define it, and we'll all have different definitions of what that means. So initially, attack surface management, comprehensive discovery, you're right, was domain-based, IP-based, and then you started to see the expansion into cloud services. You started to see the discovery of remote access capabilities. Hey, there's a Zscaler portal here, there's a VPN concentrator here. That comprehensive definition continued to grow, and now it has been this way for at least a year. That is starting to include not just generic whatever web app that may mean to you, but more specifically, hey, this is a web app that is running in this cloud. It has this type of backend for data storage. It probably has this sort of network load balancing in front of it. You're getting all this additional context, and like we talked about before, context gives you the power to make better decisions. It distills down those risks.
Yeah. Moving from sort of the discovery and testing side and prioritization into let's call it whatever you want to call it, operationalizing it, mobilizing the findings. We now see a lot more organizations wanting to weave their ASM in depth into many other solutions. A lot of our larger customers want to make sure that tickets are being opened. So ITSM integration of ASM to ITSM integration is key. Pushing findings to SIM, to SOAR, to activate orchestration jobs. And so there's a lot more operational focus as the ASM market has evolved, and a lot more operational capabilities that it seems like the customers want, including things like CMDB. We've got large customers now who want to push all findings into ServiceNow, both on the VR side and on the CMDB side, and then operationalize the results from those tools. But that's become a lot more mainstream. Have you seen that sort of operational evolution happening, and do you see that becoming sort of maybe a direction in which the criteria will expand out?
Yeah, it's likely to be a key feature in the next version of this report. It's interesting because if you look at the MVP, the minimum viable product, for a lot of tech solutions, they don't include things that help them operationalize, right? It's the MVP for ASM is comprehensive discovery, false positive management, and then sort of a distillation of all that information into an easy to read report. That's like the minimum viable product. Well, that was years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago. We've matured past that point. And as a part of that maturation now, you can't have your ASM solution just sort of sitting alone on an island. Like, hey, ASM, you're doing great, keep it up. I'm going to keep cherry picking the things that are important to my organization. That doesn't work, because that still relies on the human to go into the solution, pull out what they think is valuable. There's going to be errors in that. There's going to be mistakes in that. The solution to that problem, is an integration with an ITSM. It's an integration with CMDB. It's integrating into those technology stacks that enable modern IT delivery that is comprehensive, and it makes sense and it works.
Yeah, and I just wanted, did see a question on the Q&A side. I just wanted to address that. There was a question on, what's the connection between ASM and on the web app front. So it's our contention that it's critical for attack surface management as a capability to be able to understand web apps, to discover them if they're and to help solve the problem which DAST has not solved, which is infrequent testing and testing at a very low scale. We believe that doing that unauthenticated DAST capabilities at scale are important to protect the full real estate of web apps that are exposed to the outside, because a lot of these web apps have a lot of risk resident on them, and DAST doesn't scale out today to adequately protect web apps that are exposed. So we think ASM has become a more scalable approach to doing this for all the web apps that an organization has exposed to the internet, and to understand risk that's resident on it, to understand, what are my web apps that are not protected by a WAF? What are the ones that are capturing PII that have API or other related vulnerabilities? So that's the connection there, and it's a growing one that we see customers tend to care more about about the web app side than, let's say, just core vulnerabilities on the at the IP level. So we talk about sort of these phases, right, Chris? About discovery, about secure active security testing, about prioritization, about orchestration or mobilization of results. When you look at the space, what do you think are some of the key metrics that customers really should be thinking about in terms of the outcomes that they want to get out of ASM? For example, one that we think most of our customers are focused on is mean time to remediation. At the end of the day, they want to minimize the dwell time of any resident vulnerability, and they want to optimize their or mean time to action, even mean time to detection, action, remediation. Other metrics that you think are defining the space and that customers should focus on?
Yeah, and this is not a scientific approach. What I'm about to suggest does sound a little cavemanish, but it's effective. It's been effective for years. It's still effective today. Essentially what you do, because I think we're all familiar with the output of vulnerability management solutions. They are abundant, numerous, and often not helpful. If you get an ASM solution and you're demoing it, if you're trialing it, if it's showing you a 40% increase in assets or attack surface that you weren't aware of through whatever, merger and acquisition activity, through shadow IT, through crazy devs doing what crazy devs do, if you're not aware of that, now you're aware of it. If you have an equivalent report from the ASM solution spit out that is just as overwhelming as what was discovered, that's not a good ASM solution. If, on the other hand, however, you have an ASM solution that discovers this giant amount of assets and attack surface, and on the other end, you're left with a handful of prioritized things to go and look at, that's a pretty good barometer. It's a good way to measure, is this effective at doing what it says it's doing? Obviously you can dive in from there and kind of pick it apart and say, it missed this, or we purposefully left this out there and it miscategorized it. Absolutely, you can pick it apart. But as a starting point for measurement of how effective is this going to be for my organization, 100%, start there, define your use cases and test from that and move on.
For any of the attendees who want to take a look at want to get the full details on the radar report that Chris authored, it's available, and also we'll get to a couple of see if there's any other questions on the Q&A side. But I wanted to share a little bit about our perspective on the space as well, to sort of augment and build on top of what Chris has already authored in the report. And we really see this as a problem that starts with very deep discovery and understanding of the blind spots, because what you can't see, you can't protect. And it's really important for that, we think, to do that the right way is a black box approach, Chris, where you really don't need to to ask the customer for a lot of information, because the moment you do that, that approach is sort of limited to finding related areas. The right way to do this is to be able to uncover everything that can be tied back to an organization, and for that to be, so it's about discovery, but the sort of sub categories of discovery around attribution of assets, or even organizations or organizational structure to the root organization, to the core, to the main entity, has to be done really well for attack surface management to be operationalized properly. And that black box approach is what is sort of the root, the starting point of strong discovery, which in turn then sort of feeds what you can then assess for risk. And on the risk side, we really do think that the right approach is to take one of active security testing, and not sort of the passive approach, which leads to too much noise, too many missed threats. And at the end of the day, all of this really has to be triaged through very effective prioritization, because no matter what, if you do this right, there are going to be a lot of findings. So being able to factor in things like the discoverability of a risk to an attacker, the attractiveness to the attacker, the active exploitability of risk. These are really key factors that have helped Cycognito distinguish itself in terms of the net results, which is, how well are you, how comprehensive is your visibility, how comprehensive is the testing, how deeply are you prioritizing and optimizing for operational bandwidth. And then, as we talked about, a key evolution here, and I think we talked about it on the prep call as well, is the operational effectiveness of this. And that has to do a lot with how deeply are you integrating with other solutions to resolve findings. For example, when you see an issue on an exposed asset, are you automatically opening a ticket, informing the asset owner, tracking the resolution, revalidating the issue, to make sure that when an IT team says that they've resolved it, that it has actually been resolved. And Chris, like, we do some of our, I know you're the research dude, but we also do some research in this area. And what we find is 50% of the time, when issues are marked as resolved by, let's say, an IT ops team, it hasn't actually been resolved, because maybe they forgot to reboot the machine. So you still have a vulnerability that exists. So automating that whole cycle of discovery, triage, revalidation, resolution is what, at the end of the day, can optimize mean time to remediation, which is where we focus. If you want to learn more about the radar report, obviously you can download it here, and cycognito.com is the place to go to learn more about us. So